All right, welcome everyone. It's great to have Ryan Beach here. Ryan, as many of you know, principal trumpet of the Alabama Symphony. He's a famous podcaster, also a YouTuber, and all-around great guy. And Ryan, appreciate you being here. I want to talk about a variety of topics today. And so what I'll do is in the description below, I'll put chapter bars in case any of you want to jump around to the various topics that we're going to discuss today. But with that, welcome, Ryan.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This is pretty cool. It's nice of you to say I'm a famous podcaster. That seems, I wouldn't think of it that way, but I'm glad that you enjoy it. And yeah.
Absolutely. Your podcasts have always been great, and all the guests and during COVID, especially with all the guests that you brought on during that time period, certainly lots of great information, and you put out lots of great information on YouTube as well, and just lots of content in general. And what I appreciate most about it is sort of the candidness, maybe even the vulnerability sometimes. And one thing that's really caught my attention is, emphasis on auditions. Certainly that's something I'm passionate about, working with students on and sharing my process. And you've been so forthcoming, Ryan, and certainly it benefits a lot of people. I want to start with this, though. I mentioned you've been very transparent about auditions, but I want you to take a look at the topic from a slightly different angle with regard to auditions, Ryan, and that's the other side of the screen. What's been your experience with being on the other side of the screen? In other words, listening to the candidates as they audition for a position.
I have done that for a trombone audition and also, so 2 trombone auditions actually. And then also we had an audition that was our principal horn and assistant principal / third horn together in one audition. So I guess technically 3 auditions total. It was an enlightening experience, to say the least. Up until that point, I had always been on the other side of the screen, the one doing the auditioning. And it's just striking what it's like when you hear the same thing over and over and over again. And just kind of what the impact is, or what the vibe is, if you want to say that, of each candidate. And what things I might think are a big deal when I'm playing on the side of the screen of auditioning that end up not being as big of a deal on the other side, and then what things kind of jump out at you when you're on the other side. If you want me to talk a little bit about what some of those things are, I'd be happy to. Just wherever you want to go.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Yeah. Feel free to share. Go for it.
Yeah, I had actually written some notes after our principal horn audition, just in the case, the chance that I would have a way to share it. So that was a while ago. I don't know if I'll remember everything, but one of the things that jumped out at me the most is just when you hear a group of people back to back to back in a round. Let's say, there's 5 to 8 people. I don't know what auditions you've been a part of, but for me, it's about that size group. It's just interesting how one great player, what happens before and what happens after, can color that. And so if a really great player comes in and sounds great, but is having like a pretty good day, and then there are people around them that are having a pretty good day, or maybe not as good of a day, it's just interesting how you interpret it differently based on what's coming before and what's coming after. And so I've been in rounds, I think the first time I took the Chicago Symphony audition in 2017, I was in the same round as Esteban, and he's got the job now. And so, I feel like I played well in that round. But if you have someone like that who comes in and kills it, and they might think, well, why would we advance everybody when we have this one, this great player, and kind of sets the standard, and the other way can go too. So I guess long story short, the sort of the totality of hearing people in a group changes how things are perceived, I think. And the other thing that really jumped out at me was how impersonal it is. When I'm listening to someone and they come play for me, I am on their side and I'm rooting for them and I want everything to go well. And they play something and there might be a mistake, and I'm going to try to say, let's figure this out. But in an audition, when I don't know who's on the other side, it's very impersonal. It's harder to be, I don't know if subjective is the right word, but it's harder to have that same kind of feeling of like, yeah, like let's just work with this. It'll be great because there's lots of great players. And the idea behind an audition is people are supposed to be able to demonstrate that they understand how to play the excerpts in a way that shows that they know the style and how things go. And so it's almost as if I start to nitpick at things that I might not normally nitpick at because I'm being objective with it. And I think that's a very good thing. I think that's something that makes it so, there's no, especially behind a screen, it's a lot harder for me to say, oh, well, because of this thing doesn't have anything to do with somebody's playing. I feel like I'm rambling right now. I hope this is making sense.
Making total sense. Yeah. Keep going.
It's hard to bring this all together. But long story short, I just felt myself like if there were a couple of applicants in a row who maybe missed something or they missed the same thing, I found myself starting to be like, somebody just needs to be able to come in and nail this, right? But if I was hearing somebody and I was working with them, I feel like I'd be way more compassionate, if that makes sense. But I think it's good. I think it keeps it objective. I think auditioning is a skill in and of itself, as you were describing, and the process you use to be able to audition is part of the battle of learning how to win an audition. And it may not be the same thing that you end up doing when you actually get a job, but that's what we all got to go through. So people have different systems and they prepare them different levels and different amounts to be consistent in the things that matter, I think. And so, yeah, it's maybe an imperfect system, but I think that impersonal nature, I feel like taught me a lot about what people might be feeling on the other side of a screen when I'm auditioning, and maybe a little bit more compassion for the committee sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a hard job being on that side of the screen. I've done it a number of times with both the Air Force Band in DC and also the Pittsburgh Opera. One thing that sticks out to me from a trombone audition we did with the Pittsburgh Opera is, I don't remember how many people showed up. It was a bunch, but we heard the very first thing that we heard was the Tuba Mirum from the Mozart Requiem. And that open arpeggio, right there in the very beginning of that excerpt, nobody could play it in tune. I couldn't understand that. Yeah, and I know it's a tricky thing, but the three people that did play that opening thing, the very first notes they played in that audition, were the three people that advanced, basically, and that's sort of stunning to think about. You prepare this gigantic list, and it's true though that when you're that side of the screen, you don't see a person, and you and I both care about our students and want them to succeed, and really want to celebrate the small victories that we share with them when they're prepping for something like this. Certainly, that goes away a little bit from behind the screen, and you have to be very, very picky. Otherwise, you're not going to get the audition done. And so it's a lot of people that you have to move in and out, and you have to be like that. And it's interesting that these auditions, you have all these people show up, and you only have a handful that advance. Right? Do you have anything to speak to that?
Well, what you were just talking about maybe Tuba Mirum in that example, and that it was the first thing that was played. One thing I very vividly remember is how quickly you make a decision. It doesn't take very long at all to make a decision on a player. And so if the first thing that somebody plays is either out of tune or there's, too many missed notes or something, for me, it was hard for some of those players to work their way back up, if that makes sense. It certainly was possible, but it was harder. It was almost as if I had made this judgment that I was certainly willing to listen to the rest of the round. It's not like I was just well, that's over with. But interestingly, I felt that people came in who had a strong beginning of a round. If they had some mistakes later, I was still in sort of a good place about their playing and giving them some chances. So maybe that's, if you were to sort of draw a rule out of that or something, it might be, no matter what, the beginning of your audition, the very first excerpt and maybe even the last, depending on, leave what you leave them with, has got to be rock solid in tune, rock solid rhythm. You want everything to be that way, but especially the beginning, because I think just maybe we as people, we just make these initial first judgments, and I think sometimes can be hard to break out of those. In relationships, we have time, months and months of I made this first judgment about somebody, but I learned over time I was wrong. But in an audition, you have like 10 minutes maximum. It's probably going to be hard to dig yourself out of, a rough start. And I've been there. We've all been there, but that's kind of maybe speaking to what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, first impressions are a thing, obviously. I think, those first notes that you hear, if it's, for us, maybe it's a Leonore call or something where we have these open intervals that have to be in tune. And if they're out of tune, then that's your first impression. And so I think that's hugely important. Ryan, quick question.
Sorry, I was going to jump in too right there.
No. Yeah, go for it.
Like, this may be a very kind of harsh way to say it, but on something like things like intonation, I can take missed notes, right? Missed notes are a thing that happens to all of us. But things like intonation, rhythm, some of these things that aren't really negotiable. I've certainly played my fair share of notes out of tune or played wrong rhythms. But if you come in and it's something like a Leonore call and it's out of tune, it's just hard to not have the vibe as someone on the committee that's like, this person didn't take the time to make sure that they were going to play this thing in tune. Like, what do they think of our ensemble? What do they think of us? And how highly do they hold the ensemble in regard that they wouldn't even check something as simple as intonation and to make sure? Again, things happen. It's not a black and white statement, but I think those kinds of building blocks at a professional level are like, they're taken care of, I think, most of the time. And so when people are focused on missing notes, and I remember in my audition, the one that I won almost 10 years ago now, they put West Side Story, the Mambo excerpt, on the first round. And I remember thinking that was crazy. Like, that to me feels like a last, or final round excerpt. But I found out later from one of the people on the committee that the thing that got people cut on that the most was not missing any of the high notes or just missing notes in general, was a whole bunch of people played the rhythm incorrectly in that section. And it was really eye-opening that missed notes are far less of a problem than people think they are. And intonation, rhythm, I think those are the things that trip a lot more people up than they realize, and they just don't even know.
Yeah, good stuff. I'm going to ask you point blank, have you ever played a perfect round, Ryan? Have you ever felt really like everything was right there?
No. I think the closest I've gotten, I remember in Indianapolis, my first and my second round, I don't think they were perfect, but I remember walking out of there being like, these are the best rounds I've ever played in my life. And I think still to this day, those rounds that I played in the first and second round of the Indianapolis audition that I ended up winning were my best ones. But in the final round, I remember almost like having something happen in every single excerpt. Maybe I chipped the high A in Mahler 5. I remember I was supposed to do the offstage call for Heldenleben, and I started on the wrong partial. And so I'm playing B flats instead of a D. And then I realized it like 2 measures in, and I was like, what am I supposed to do now? And so I just stopped, asked if I could do it again. It went well. And so everything worked out. But, so no, I've never played perfectly. And to the opposite, I have had experiences where I did not play as well as I wanted to, and I still advanced. But the majority of what has happened is I have not played as well as I wanted to, and I didn't advance. So I think I've sort of ran the gamut.
Yeah, I hear you. I've never played a perfect round. In fact, I don't know many people who have, and that's a question that I like to ask. There's certainly rounds that you feel better about than others. That's interesting what you said about Indianapolis, where the first 2 rounds you felt like that, the best 2 rounds of your life, and in the final round you had some misses, but they were obviously on to you, and certainly. There's other things that we can do musically that can really sell the committee, and it sounds like that's what you did.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, obviously they liked something I was doing, and I do think it's a real thing that you might get a little bit more leeway in the final round of an audition than you do in the first round of an audition. I think that with so many people, I remember when we did our horn audition, we had like 50 people to get through in the first round. It was a ridiculously long round, like time-wise, and people. And I remember the first couple of people I listened to, I was like, that sounds really good, but maybe if the articulation was a little bit more aggressive, or, if they just played with a little bit more flow, and I would sort of be like, well, can we have that person play again? And the committee would be like, not that like, no, that's not worthwhile. It's just like, well, maybe we got to get through it or whatever. And so I felt at first like we should be giving them more of a chance. And then I think over the course of time, I realized, yeah, like this is not a time for me to coach somebody on how to play in this group. Right now, it's the time for people to demonstrate on relatively basic excerpts that they understand like what's going on. And once I made that mental shift, it was like, oh yeah, like we have so many people to get through. And like right now, I mean, we're certainly listening for musicality, but if rhythm and intonation is what's getting most people cut, then like we're, you know, those are things that are possible to work out and to fix. And so again, I don't think I've advanced at an audition since I won my job in Alabama. I've probably taken 9 auditions. So there's something I have either haven't figured out, or I just play in a way where some people really like it and other people it's not their preference. But I just think, yeah, like the first round of an audition, you have a little bit less leeway. It's a little bit more like you either can or you can't. And I think as you get along and you earn a little bit of trust with the committee, you make some mistakes, they might be more willing to hear you do something again or ask you to try things a different way. It's not across the board a true statement, but I think that's sort of maybe a way to think about it.
Yeah, good stuff. Appreciate the transparency as always. I'm going to switch gears a little bit here. Mm-hmm. So what are you working on in your own fundamental practice these days? And also I find that these typically overlap. What are you working with your students, and what are some things that you're really focused in on as far as those go?
Yeah. Since the beginning of the pandemic, almost, I've been really trying to increase my consistency of release in first attack. I feel that I've always been a strong player, and I've always been, you know, playing loud Bruckner-like things sort of has been in my wheelhouse, but playing technical, kind of light, needing a lot of agility, that has been hard for me. And so, you know, with all that time, I really just backed up and I started playing really simple things, trying to play it at the highest level I could, and to really start to assess, like, is there something I need to change or something I need to do? And those Håkan videos of him doing Charlier really helped. They really helped me. I started to analyze, like, what is he doing? Because I just felt like he would take a breath and then the sound would just appear with ease. I was like, that's what I want. So I started to develop some ideas and some thoughts, and then a lot of my practice, like my only focus was just trying to keep my air forward, which is now like one of my repeated things in my teaching over and over and over again. Because to me, everything is built off of like forward and consistent air. So that's basically a lot of what I'm trying to imprint. And interesting, for me at least, interestingly, I'm getting closer and closer to feeling like it's a skill that's a habitual automatic skill. But it's taken like 3 years of just nonstop focusing and obsessing over trying to bring this into my playing. And so the only reason I share that is I think sometimes students can have unrealistic expectations about how long it takes for certain things to actually become like part of your playing. Like we can learn certain skills relatively quickly, but for it to be the neural patterns to be all myelinated and all that kind of stuff, I think it takes a long time to get to the point where we actually kind of don't have to think about those things anymore. And I have students, I was just talking about with them yesterday, actually, about this kind of thing, because they're frustrated. Well, I've been working hard, and I've seen some progress, but I feel like I should have seen more progress, or I wish I've seen more progress, or whatever. And so it's a nice opportunity to have the chat of like, what is your expectation? And like, what is that expectation based in? Because my experience and science would say these things happen very slowly, especially if you're doing them right. They're slow, but they stick over time. So that's a lot of what I work on, is trying to get my air forward, my sound center, just producing at what I would say is near my 100% level. And then trying to do long tones like that, you know, and then flexibility studies, adding a little bit of difficulty, and then Clark studies, you're still slurring everything, but now you're moving your vowels. And then articulation studies, so now you're adding articulation, coordination's difficulty, multiple tonguing, and then maybe some etudes or maybe whatever I'm working on with work or something like that. But it's very like my practice has become so much more systematic than it ever was before. I borrowed all of that from working out, observing programs that people use to progressively get stronger. And so that is what it's been for me is I'm assigning certain exercises to certain skills, practicing those for a little while to try to get better at them, trying to keep the quality high as I can at all times. And then after a certain period of time, I'll, reassess, switch some exercises out for a little bit more difficult ones, and then start the whole process over. So it's kind of on this like month-long cycle for me, at least in terms of my fundamentals. And then, yeah, with students, it's just trying to interpret what am I doing that would be valuable for them to do, because some of my skills are much more developed than their skills. So they shouldn't be doing exactly the same thing I'm doing, I think. But what is that basic skill that I'm doing that I can try to explain to them so that they understand how I'm doing it, and then assigning appropriate exercises so they can find as much success in the practice room. And right now, that's like basic Arbin exercises, basic violin exercises, Clark studies, all of that stuff we all built our foundation on. That's kind of trying to drive as much quality into their playing with those things. So I don't know if that was detailed enough or too detailed, but that's kind of what I'm thinking about and when asking or answering that question.
No, that's great. Yeah, I mean, one thing that we don't know when we're younger, realize, I guess, when we're younger, is that this is a lifelong process. It doesn't happen overnight. And even though people are, getting jobs when they're 22, 25 years old, even for them, it's a lifelong process. And really, for me anyway, I have to start over every day and relearn how to play the trumpet in a sense. I mean, obviously, certain things are quicker than they used to be, but just starting over on a daily basis has been sort of one of my mantras. But yeah, that's true. I mean, there's always something to do, and I think that's what makes what we do, Ryan, so interesting and engaging, and wanting to share that with others is a big thing, I think.
Yeah. I'm curious for your take. I think for me, it was hard to be patient with the process because I always felt like I was just waiting for everything to be good, Like I'll work really hard, but that's because I'm working, so it'll get good. And I now realize that most of the fun in practice is like in the experimentation, trying different things, seeing what works, trying another thing. Like sort of in that experimentation process, that's where you get a lot of the creativity, I think, in our field. And I'm curious if you were similar to me or if you had a better outlook. But for me, it was just all about getting to that next step as quickly as possible. And like, I wasn't even considering, is getting there as quickly as possible even the best option long term? Or like, if I took more time, what would I gain by something happening a little bit slower? I'm curious, were you kind of like me in that way, or did you have a different outlook when you were younger?
No, with regard to experimenting, I think, first of all, we have to become our own teachers. And if we're having issues, we have to become problem solvers, because one thing that I've found is no matter how good your teacher is, you've got to, you're different. You have a different set of circumstances, and being able to teach yourself is one thing that I like to teach my students. So yeah, no, that I've had to, experiment with lots of things, especially when I run into a problem or something that's not, it's not what I envision in my playing. And so, yeah, I get off the drawing board and start over and, get on YouTube or whatever, try to address that issue with people that I trust. And, even still, like my old teachers, if I run into an issue, what do you think about this? And, I'm always learning. And so that's a huge part of this process, is being able to experiment and get yourself out of certain things. And, we're like baseball players, in some regards. They go into a hitting slump or something to that effect, and, they have all these coaches and, all these psychologists who are helping them through that. And I think, we have to have, I think there's a lot of parallels with athletics, and sports with what we do, and being able to be open-minded enough to try something new, I think is an important part of the creative process, for sure. And, as far as me, like my first notes of the day, they kind of look similar because I know where I want to get those first notes. And so I try to get myself back to where I was yesterday with my first notes of the day. And if I'm having issues that I have to address, I usually address those after I've, taken a tone bath, as Rafael Mendez would say, or, you know, um, but there's probably on a daily basis, there's things that I'm experimenting with to try to figure out how to do a particular thing better. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. I mean, I like the structure of my practice, but I've learned how to take that structure and have a fair amount of freedom with it, right? For that, because I think that experimentation is pretty necessary. So I agree totally.
Awesome. Yeah. Let's change gears yet again here. And, you've been putting content out for years, Ryan. You're ahead of the curve here. And, you've been sharing your stuff out there, and it's really benefited a lot of people, including myself. I've really, and probably the last year, gotten into the whole YouTube thing. I'm currently taking a course on how to present material better, as far as that goes. And certainly I have things that I feel like I want to share, and I'm excited to do that. And you've certainly been willing to do that over the years. So why, let's speak YouTube, because this is the going to be released here on YouTube. Why YouTube would be my first question, maybe, and sort of what keeps you motivated to help others? Because I know we're both in the business of, giving others a hack that we didn't have when we did that when we were trying to, get through certain issues. So I want to get your take on that.
Mm. YouTube. I like YouTube because I have learned a lot from YouTube. Like everything I know about working out, I learned from YouTube. I have now learned a significant portion of information from YouTube about videography and creating content, exactly like what you were just describing. And so, there was a desire to give back to this platform that has given me a lot. What I've gone through a lot of different motivations over the time or the years that I've done it. When I first did it, I really wanted to grow a YouTube channel, get a lot of views, get monetized, make some money, maybe become someone who just creates content and creates other types of content, and basically turn it into this, I am self-employed, right? Like a YouTuber, if you want to call it that. That didn't happen at all. And obviously the podcast was part of that idea as well. And I mean, I wanted to share. I thought I had ideas that were good and interesting to consider. But after a little while, it's what should I say? If you look at other YouTubers, like fitness or videography or camera stuff, that's where I spend a lot of my time. Some a fitness YouTuber might have 12 videos on how to bench press that are all slightly different. Or, the camera people have it easy because there's new cameras coming out all the time. And so there's always going to be something that some piece of gear or some piece of tech, if their channel is oriented in that direction. I don't want to say they have it easy. It's just kind of there's an ability for content to be generated all the time. So for me, it was I want to share what I think about articulation or flexibility. I have a sort of a series on the fundamentals of trumpet. And then it was I'm going to record myself playing beach etudes, or I'm going to do this or that. And then I took this hiatus for a very long time, or that's what I consider to be a long time, from last June of 2022 to basically a month ago. And that was just because I was just too busy. Something had to give, and YouTube being something I was interested in, but not generating money. I just needed, same thing with the podcast. I stopped podcasting for a little while there too. And it was interesting because then I started teaching at UNA in Florence, Alabama, University of North Alabama, with my friend Joe Gray. And I began to be able to hone some of the language of the ways I describe things. And so then I got some motivation again to create some videos that the couple of that I've put out recently, and I have plans for more. That's just, like just trying to share. Almost you could think of it as like what I would share with someone in the first like 1 or 2 lessons, just to put it out there for free, because I end up saying the same kinds of things, in the first couple of lessons. And so, it can be very daunting to like give away information when you feel like somebody could or would pay you for it. But I just think that I can't teach enough trumpet lessons right now for me to be able to like make a living or to make it worth spending all that time. So I now have chosen to spend my time making content in a way that can benefit far more people than I could teach in any given period of time. And, maybe some of that will come back around, and there will be some sort of ROI, if you want to use that word or that acronym. But in general, it's like if I have something to share, I like to have opportunities to practice creating videos, to practice editing a little bit differently, or practice lighting a little bit differently. Or so that for me, it's a way to constantly hone my videography skills. And then also, I feel like I got something to say, and I'm going to put it out there, and people can decide like what they think about it. And I think I've sort of moved past that initial, like, I'm doing this to benefit, not just, I mean, obviously you want it to benefit yourself, but I'm not doing it so I could like make money and monetize. Rather, I really just want to put some information out there that I think people would get something out of or find interesting, or maybe it can add something to what they're doing. And then also with YouTube, you can actually explain yourself, right? On something like Instagram, TikTok, or whatever, Twitter. It's like 60 seconds. You can't explain anything in 60 seconds. And it's not like a platform that's designed for, longer things. And so I like YouTube because I can present a video and edit it so it has some flow to it, but I can actually fully explain an idea so that when someone watches the video, they walk away with like a kind of a more complete picture, rather than Instagram where I have to, put a caption that's like, articulation is this, and then I'm posting some video of me playing that's just trying to get attention. So I don't know. There's a whole bunch of thoughts I just shared with you. I don't know if what that makes you think, or if that's like a good thing, but that's kind of my relationship with social media and with YouTube. And I'm pretty committed to just trying to put out good information. I love what you're doing. I saw your video that you put out that was similar in content to the one I ended up putting out. And I just think the more videos of people sharing what they think is important and describing it in the way that they think is effective and clear, the better. Like there's so many different camera channels, there's so many different fitness channels that you can go to, and everybody's got a little bit different way of saying it, or what they care about is a little bit different. And so you're not gonna have the same perspective as me. So I think the fact that you're out there making content, trying to get better, trying to share it in an engaging way, even if we happen to say this a very similar thing, it's still beneficial it's not like a zero-sum game. You know what I mean? Like everybody can benefit from everybody, quality information. So I think it's awesome.
Yeah, YouTube, you're not going to get rich off of YouTube, but even if you are monetized, I think it's something like $3 or $4 per 1,000 views or something. And so that's definitely, if it is a motivation, maybe you should do something else. I've sort of committed, Ryan, to Mondays during the day and Tuesdays during the day. I kind of keep those as my days to do YouTube stuff, and and then release a video on Friday. I enjoy the process. I look back at videos because I started like right at a year ago, and it's really, Ryan, hard for me to go back and watch some of those early videos, and I just want to take them down actually. But anyway, it is a process, and it's cool to see how you can improve and how you can get better, and then also to the feedback that you get. Ryan, I would argue, your content that you put out there is, people know about it. People have grown to trust that. And I think it's very, very beneficial. And you're right. YouTube, people use YouTube for everything. I mean, I don't know, whatever I have to do around the house. I mean, I go to YouTube to try to figure that out. And if we can be that to someone else, I think that's worth it. And I think for me, I hope all of my students become better musicians than I am. I'm not going to withhold any information or any secrets or tricks. And I think, the fact that, we're developing sort of this database of information that can help others. I think there's the legacy thing there as well too, that we're creating, and we're passing down information that can save people a lot of time. And I think that that's in and of itself is worth doing what we do, Ryan.
Yeah, I totally agree. And like what you're describing about your students and trying to help them, like one of the cool benefits of creating these videos, if like no one else watched it but my students, it would still be I will still be glad that I created it, because it can only help deepen like they can always come back to this video and watch it. And if I've presented it in a clear manner, hopefully it will help, anything that I may have said in a lesson that they didn't quite remember this or that, instead of having to record it themselves and like go back and listen to the exact time I said this one phrase. It can be a useful thing for my studio. The other thing that it could be is for like a recruiting thing. Like somebody can find out before they come study with me or study at the school, they can find out this is what I'm about. These are the kinds of things I think. This is what I value. And it's like kind of like a business card in and of itself. And these days, I'm really into like, how many ways can this be beneficial? And at first it was like, I want to make videos for YouTube so people will watch them and, like I said, make monetize. But now I'm starting to see how much more utility a video has for me and what I'm trying to do. And like, the sort of monetization of YouTube is like 7th down the list. Like that would be cool to have someday, but I think it's like very far down the list compared to the immediate utility of like my students can benefit, or people online can have access to, oh, that's a way I've never thought of it before. Or I got a couple comments on one of my videos that was like, this is a concept I've been working with and trying to understand. In some way you described like one part of that video, like helped me put one piece I was missing in there. I'm sure you've had comments that are similar to that as well. And so, yeah, it's like you almost don't know what's going to happen or who's going to see it or how it's going to work. And so in that way, it's almost like just like what you're talking about. Like sometimes you want to go back and like delete your old stuff. It's like you're just like putting stuff out there, trying to learn as you go. And sometimes it just takes a life on of itself. And I think that's been, at least for me and the way that I'm wired, that kind of extra creativity has been very fulfilling for me. So there's just a whole bunch of reasons why content creation was a good direction for me to go, I think. Sounds like for you too.
Absolutely. And Ryan, I can tell you firsthand that you're making an impact, and on me and many, many others. So bravo, keep doing it. Keep working it. And I'll plan to do the same. So we're running out of time here. This is kind of a selfish question maybe, but also maybe this will benefit others as well, listening or watching. I have this thing in totally different gear here. Whenever I'm starting a new concert cycle with the opera or whatever group I'm working on, I walk away from first rehearsals, even though I'm prepared, feeling unsatisfied, like that didn't go as well as I had envisioned. And I wonder, Ryan, if you over the years have walked away from first rehearsals feeling like that, and then by the time you're performing on the weekend, things are just fine. But I don't know if you've ever encountered this, and maybe if you have, or if you've had some success in getting better at this, what are some things that you've done to get better at that?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm the best person to ask this question, because like I think my expectation is pretty low. Not like my standard of playing is very, very, very high. But I think sometimes my expectation is like pretty low. So like if I don't play as well in a rehearsal as I would like, I don't tend to carry it with me too much. I'm certainly, analyzing and trying to figure out what do I want to improve upon. But I'm not sure I have any expectation related to a certain way I should be playing in a first rehearsal or even in a concert or something like that, if that makes sense. So like I don't have a really good answer, because I think for me, it's not something that like I carry too much. I mean, there's certainly been times, concerts, first rehearsals, whatever, where I have been unsatisfied, but that to me is just fuel to figure out, well, how am I not going to do that in the future? And I think even just that process of acknowledging, okay, that like it's okay that that didn't go as well as I want. Like, I don't have to beat myself up about it, but kind of what you're describing, it's like, at the same time, why did that happen? Trying to use it as an opportunity to learn. I think you do that enough over the course of time, and hopefully you'll have solved all the problems, right? And then it'll have minimized the thing. So I'm not sure if that's an answer that is satisfactory for you. Maybe you're looking for something a little more concrete, but that's kind of what comes to mind.
No, I was just curious. I always make improvements between the first and second rehearsal. It'd be nice to show up and nail the first rehearsal. And
So what do you do to prepare? Like, how do you prepare for a first rehearsal? Because that would be helpful in knowing if there's other types of ways to prepare. How do you typically do that?
typical things, just listen. Certain times look at the score if I feel like I need to. I think a thing that we sometimes miss when we're reading a piece that we haven't done in a while, or a new piece, that the things behind the scenes, like what's going on in the rests, and that sort of thing, to sort of prepare. I could probably do more of that. It's just, for me, it's, being settled and comfortable on that first rehearsal. Maybe that's not even a thing. I don't know. I'm trying to figure that one out. But the key is getting better each rehearsal and getting ready for the performances and that sort of thing. But and I don't think people even are like, oh man, Chris sucks on his first rehearsal.
Right.
I don't think that's a thing. But just my own own mind, I wish first rehearsals were easier.
Like, and what's the effect of it? Like, is it just a felt thing, or do you find yourself like missing more notes than you would like in the first rehearsal, or missing entrances? Like, what's the effect of it? Like, what's the thing that's telling you that you're not quite where you want to be?
There's no effects necessarily, other than my personal standards and want it to be ready to go right then. I think too, for me, the last 30 minutes of that first rehearsal too, the concentration part of that is something that it's just hard to concentrate for that period of time. And then, I don't know. I don't know what I'm trying to say, Ryan, other than, I have a first rehearsal tomorrow. We're reading Trovatore, and I'm very prepared, and I'm going to be relaxed, and I'm going to have a good time, and I'm going to concentrate to the end. That's I guess what I envision.
I think focus is the delineating factor between like high level performing and not, right? Like, I feel like very rarely these days are my skills that I've developed the reason why I didn't do something as well as I wanted. And I think focusing at a high level is the hardest part about playing a job, because it's so monotonous at times, and the rehearsals are just long enough, like you said, that it's easy to let it go. Or like for me, I get a little bit too comfortable, and so I'm just like sort of daydreaming or something like that, and all of a sudden I got to come back in. And usually my attention is pretty good, but the flexing the muscle of focus, obviously it's not a muscle, but you get what I'm saying, I think is unbelievably important for all of us as professionals. And the way that I typically have tried to improve that is, is like in my practice sessions, all like the cue I use all the time for my own trumpet playing to keep me on track and playing healthy is just this physical sensation of like feeling the air come on my lips when I breathe, and then feeling the air in the same exact spot when I release. And then the focus building part is, can I focus 100% of my thoughts on that one thing? And that the development of that ability has, it just translates into, well, if I shift my focus to something else, I have developed the ability to basically like own total focus. And that's been very, very helpful for maintaining like high level performing, across a whole rehearsal or across a whole week. So I don't know if that's kind of another angle to take, feeling like there's like a actionable, like in my practice sessions, I'm doing this thing that's helping the first rehearsal, but it's sort of like a tangential way of getting there, right? It's not quite as direct, but that's been really helpful. It's something I tell my students all the time. Like, I tell them this air forward cue, and then I was like, okay, like for the first like month of your trumpet playing, that's the only thought I want in your head. Like, I don't want you to think about your fingers. I don't want you to think about your sound. I don't want you to think about, like almost like anything else. I just want you to do that because not only do I want them to play the trumpet in that way, because I think everything is built from a good, healthy airstream, but also I want them to build that muscle of I can actually just focus on this one thing as well. So it's kind of like building focus as well. So I don't know if that's an angle that, triggers some thoughts that might be related or helpful, but that's another thing that it made me think.
That's great stuff. Yeah, awesome. Ryan, we're about out of time here. Thanks so much. Really, really appreciate you joining me today. And yeah, this has been great. It really has.
Yeah, I've enjoyed this. It flew by this time. I feel like we just started. So I appreciate you having me on. I love talking about this stuff, and it's good to get some of your perspective too. So thanks for having me.